I call the February 12th, 2024 meeting of the Legislative Commission on Pensions and Retirement to order. A quorum is present. Our first item on the agenda is approval of the meeting minutes. We do have a few meeting minutes from different events and meetings that we've held, and so we're going to approve all of those meeting minutes. So we have our final regular LCPR hearing in May of 2023, our January 8th, 2024 Executive Committee meeting, and our two off-site hearings in Duluth and Fergus Falls. Is there a motion to approve all four of those minutes?
So moved.
Senator Frentz moves approval of the May 4th, 2023, October 30th, 2023, January 8th, and January 11th, 2024 meetings. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails and the minutes are adopted. Our next item as the LCPR is to designate a member of the newly established Secure Choice Board. Before we designate this member, I will have our nonpartisan staff explain the motion and the need for it. Executive Director Susan Lincheski, can you please explain?
Thank you, Chair Hurd. Good morning. My name is Susan Lincheski. I'm the Executive Director of the Legislative Commission on Pensions and Retirement. You will see in your meeting materials a proposed motion by which the Commission can approve the appointment of a member of the Board of Directors of the Secure Choice Retirement Program to convene the first meeting of the Board. As you may recall from the 2023 session, the Commission considered and approved a bill, eventually enacted, that established a new program called the Minnesota Secure Choice Retirement Program. The program will require all employers in the state of Minnesota that employ 5 or more employees to deduct a percentage of pay from each of their employees' paychecks and transmit the deduction to the state for deposit in an individual retirement account, or IRA, in the name of the employee. The individual accounts will be invested by the State Board of Investment. Employees will then be able to access their accounts to fund their retirements. The program is required to be opened in phases over a 2-year period beginning after January 1, 2025. The Commission had 2 responsibilities related to the formation of the 7-member Board of Directors. The first was to appoint 3 directors. At a meeting on January 8th, the Commission's Executive Committee, consisting of Chair Hurd, Vice Chair Frentz, and Secretary O'Driscoll, appointed 3 members to the board. The individuals are Cynthia Geiwitz, Danica Goschert, and James Miley. A few days later, the governor appointed 2 members, as he was required to appoint under the law. In addition to these 5 individuals, the Executive Director of the Minnesota State Retirement System, or MSRS, Aaron Leonard, and the Executive Director of the State Board of Investment, Jill Schertz, complete the 7-member board. The second task required to be completed by the Commission is to select from among the 7 board members a director who will work with Commission staff to convene the first meeting of the board. With her leadership, experience, and expertise and access to the resources needed to convene that first meeting, staff suggested and Chair Hurd has concurred that Aaron Leonard would be an excellent choice to take on this responsibility. Perhaps more importantly, she's willing to do so. At the first meeting of the board, it is anticipated that the board will be introduced to the program, elect a chair, and begin the process of hiring an executive director. Please see the motion in your materials. Thank you.
With Director Lincheski's summary and update, do we have any questions from the Commission? If not, then I will move that the Legislative Commission on Pensions and Retirement designate Aaron Leonard, Executive Director of the Minnesota State Retirement System, to convene the first meeting of the Board of Directors of the Minnesota Secure Choice Retirement Program. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The motion prevails, and Director Leonard has been designated to convene the first meeting of the board. We will now turn to the informational items on our agenda. So before we begin, we will note for members that we have updated documents in your packets in the standard packet items folder that now includes an updated version of our pension plan statistics. Document using 2023 valuation numbers and updated statutory information, as well as an NASRA article overviewing public pension plan amortization policies. I just said that's a lot, but you know. can all take a look at that. For members of the public, the pension plan statistics document was posted on the LCPR website on Friday, and anyone who wants the NSRA document can contact our commission assistant, Lisa Deslin. I will note that we did receive a significant amount of submitted testimony related to these items. One item for the actual presentation and 42 pieces of submitted testimony for the TRA plan presentation. LCPR staff have produced a printed packet for each side of the table, and all of the submitted materials are available on the LCPR hearing website. First, we are planning to hear from VIA Actuarial Solutions, the LCPR's retained actuary on our pension plan actuarial valuation. The 2018-2022 experience study, actual standards of practice updates, and an overview of amortization and layered amortization. Do we have them at the, oh, there we go. Welcome to the commission. Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your presentation.
Good morning, Chair Her, Commission staff. I am Mark Schulte, actuary at the Actuarial Solutions is my colleague Emily Knutson. We're the retained actuaries for the Legislative Commission on Pensions and Retirement. And we're here today to give a brief update on projects that we completed last session, what we're working on this session, and also some updates on a few technical items that are affecting public pensions today.
Mr. Schulte, can you pull that microphone closer to you or maybe talk closer to it? We are having some audio issues
Okay.
this morning.
Can
Thank
you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Emily. She's going to discuss the actual work we've done the past year and what's on tap this year.
So we'll start today with, Madam Chair and Commission members, my name is Emily Knutson. I'm an actuarial consultant with VIA Actuarial Solutions. Can you hear me okay? We will start today with a reminder about how all the parties overseeing the statewide pension plans are related. The pension systems, retained actuaries, the LCPR, and the LCPR's actuary all have important roles to administer and strengthen the statewide pension plans. The pension systems have retained actuaries who are responsible for preparing valuation reports, experience studies, and other measurements required by statutes or requested by the systems. The LCPR's actuary, us, we provide independent actuarial advice and another perspective to the LCPR on actuarial matters. Those include actuarial audits and replications, review of the actuarial assumptions, expert testimony, and legislative cost analyses. The Commission is responsible for guiding pension legislative proposal based on information from the systems and their actuaries. Here's a brief overview of the projects we completed for the 2023 session. Each year we replicate the actuarial valuations for a subset of the statewide plans. We try to review each plan every 3 to 5 years. This type of actuarial audit is a best practice to ensure that actuarial liabilities and funding calculations are producing accurate results. These reports are provided to Commission staff, system directors, and the system's retained actuaries so they can review our findings. Last year, we completed the replications for St. Paul teachers and both correctional plans. We delivered reports at the end of the session which confirmed that we were able to independently match the actuarial calculations and the reports were accurate. We also provide expert testimony as needed. One example is the numerous discussions in the investment return assumption over the past few sessions, which did result in a new discount rate last year. Other tasks we completed for the LCPR were preparing cost estimates of proposed legislation and providing actuarial input on any other items that arose during these meetings. Turning over to 2024, we have already completed reviews of the experience studies for 3 statewide pension plans, and that was Parageneral, MSRS General, and TRA. You may hear more about these experience studies from the systems later today. We do recommend that the LCPR approve the assumption updates from the retained actuaries. We are currently in the process of replicating the police and fire and state patrol actuarial valuations. We will also be available for analyzing proposed legislation and providing expert testimony as needed. If the Commission doesn't have any questions, I will turn it back over to my colleague Mark Schulte to go over the actuarial issues that may arise this session.
Okay, Commission members, we have a few things to talk about today, mostly related to the assumption studies that were prepared by the retained actuaries this year. And then some related issues as far as the amortization period, and you're gonna hear that terminology quite a bit, and we'll talk about that as we get into the presentation. The first item being that along with the assumptions that were recommended for update in the experience studies, there's some discussion in these experience studies about considering other methods for amortizing unfunded liabilities. When we talk about amortizing, that's just the method for paying down the unfunded liabilities for the pension plans and how long that should be spread over what period of time. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. But two other items we brought up in our review of the experience studies was we'd recommend that the SBI prepare a new asset liability study. The last one was completed back in 2016. You know, there was a lot of work that went into the investment return assumption the past couple sessions. And just anticipating if this topic ever comes up again, having another perspective from somebody who's really close to the investments would be useful. The last time it was updated was 2016. So we'd encourage that to occur. Also, there's an assumption that the systems all use independently called the combined service annuity assumption. It's when a member has service in multiple pension systems. And that's something that was last looked at by the Commission's prior retained actuary back in 2016. Because we are the only ones that have data for all the systems. So we'd recommend authorizing us to review that assumption just because it's been a while since it's been looked at. Moving on, the first topic that's a bit technical in nature we're going to talk about is an actuarial standard of practice. And we're not going to do a deep dive on this. The systems have all been informed by their retained actuaries about it. But it is something that is of interest in the public pension sphere across the country this year. And these actuarial standards of practice really give guidance to us as professionals of what we're going to show in our actuarial evaluation reports. And one of the items that's got some attention is a measurement, a new measurement of the pension liabilities called the low default risk obligation measure. A lot of words, and it's usually abbreviated the LDROM. And it's an alternative perspective. Instead of valuing the liabilities using the investment return assumption, as is commonly done, is to use low-risk investments like a corporate bond yield curve or corporate bond rates. And it creates a different measurement. And this is disclosed now in the actuarial reports. It's usually in the risk section, just to provide an alternative perspective. It doesn't necessarily have a lot of meaning as far as what you can do with the pensions today, but it's a different way of looking at it. It's sort of supposed to measure what is the anticipated investment risk or investment return that you're getting by investing in a diversified portfolio versus a low risk portfolio. We're just bring it up in case that terminology comes up at all during the session. Be glad to provide additional information as needed, but want to make sure that that LDROM topic has at least been broached here so it's understandable what it is. Personally, the other two items in this actuarial standard practice that are much more useful to the ongoing operation of the plan is the assessment of the current funding policy. And then, so what the actuaries are supposed to do is actually look at the funding policy and say, do we expect this to accumulate enough money to pay benefits when they're due? And if not, if we don't believe it's reasonable, we need to disclose a reasonable actuarial contribution. And this is a bit of a complicated topic for the Minnesota state plans because they are what are known as fixed rate plans. The contributions are fixed rates that are set in statute. And then you'll hear later that we compare them to an actuarial rate to get this funding sufficiency or deficiency, which is a really important measure just to make sure that those fixed rates are expected to fund the pensions long term. And so what this is saying is the comparison that's done, and they're called the required contribution rates. We'll talk about those on the next slide. They are developed to say, well, how long are we going to amortize our unfunded liability? And is that reasonable or not to have it amortized over a 30-year period? And that's really the question that comes up here is the contribution rates are set in statute. We know what's being contributed is really the yardstick about how we measure whether those are sufficient or not. Is that yardstick really, is it using best practices? Is it providing a meaningful answer? So we just have a slide here to describe what these required contribution rates are. Again, they're the comparison rates. There's two pieces to it. The normal cost, which is the amount of liability that's earned during the year. So you want to pay down the liabilities as they're accrued. You want to fund those, and those are done through contributions. And then the amortization or the pay down of the unfunded actuarial accrued liability, the UAL. And the long-term goal here is you want to pay down this entire unfunded liability so you're only contributing the normal cost. In a perfect world, that's all that's going into a pension plan. And day one of a pension plan, that is what goes into a pension plan. It's just that as an unfunded liability accrues, you have to find a way to pay that down. So we're looking at that amortization of the unfunded liability and what might be some alternatives versus the current methods that are set in statute. And right now, you may be aware that generally Minnesota statewide pension plans have used a 30-year period. And back decades ago, that was sort of standard practice. There was a 30-year amortization period for pension liabilities, and that generally has become a weaker standard. That contemporary actuarial practice really likes to see that shortened up over about 20 years or so that there's just it aligns better with when the services are being provided and as the contributions go in, so aligning with a member's career. So we'll just talk about that a little bit, the 30-year period, whether that is the best option that is out there for these required contribution rates. And another issue that came up this year that's very much related is that there's also a provision in statutes currently where if there's a change in assumptions, change in plan provisions, there's an automatic mechanism to almost re-amortize those new pieces over a new 30-year period. And it kind of gets blended with the old unfunded liability. But that can be, I won't call it a surprise, but it's automatic. You know, I think it's intended to be a safety valve, but it may not be necessarily what the systems want to do is re-amortize things over another 30-year period. So we're just going to bring up a couple ideas, and this is not something that necessarily needs immediate action, but to start some discussion of are the current statutory required contributions, these yardsticks for measuring the fixed rates, are they meeting their objective of validating the fixed contribution rates? And what are some options going forward? And the first item we'd suggest is a shorter amortization period. You know, looking at what that might look like in the future. Currently, I think many of the systems have 25-ish years left in amortizing their unfunded liability. Some have more because of the recent assumption change. And then instead of having this one big bucket of unfunded liability that's amortized over a shrinking period, and typically what happens then is as you get to a shorter amortization period, things are changed and it gets re-amortized over another 30-year period, is setting it up in layers. And we've got a graphic to just kind of illustrate how this works. And it's a practice other systems are looking at too, where you have your initial unfunded liability, amortize it over 20, 25 years, and you know you're actually going to pay that down. There's no re-amortizing. You're going to pay that off. And then as you get additional liability, those slices are again amortized over new 20-year periods. And so it has a couple advantages. You actually have an end date that's not going to be reset, and you're going to pay off each of these layers of unfunded liability. And two, it really helps identify what's the source of any unfunded liability, because you keep track of all these bases, you know, whether it's from investment returns that maybe do or do not meet expectations, assumption changes, plan changes, and it's all separately identified so you have a good historical record of what has contributed to any pension unfunded liability. Questions on that? I realize I've gone through it very quickly, but.
Senator Rasmussen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Schulte, for the, I think, important conversation and discussion. One question I had for you is, in last year's tax bill, there was a provision relating to pensions, which was not approved by this commission, that moved out the amortization date for TRA by 5 years. And Madam Chair, my question for Mr. Schulte is, does that deviate from actuarial best practices? And I believe that would give them a 35-year amortization period, which is what they have currently in law, which would deviate from all of our other statewide plans.
Mr. Schulte.
Chair Herr, Representative or Senator Rasmussen. I'd say that it's a weaker standard. I believe it went out to 30 years, so they have a new 30-year amortization period. And it is backstopped by the fact that the state has been willing to make contributions to fund these plans. So while we would maybe prefer to have a shorter amortization period, you just have to be careful when it's extended that there is sufficient will to pay down the debt eventually. But I'd say preference would be to have a shorter period, but it does make it, I'd say it reduces those required contribution rates if they're spread out over a longer period of time.
Senator Rasmussen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Another question for Mr. Schulte. when we look at this, kind of statutory provision that you highlighted that, provides for recalculating the amortization period, do you think, should that be in our state statute? Does that make sense to have kind of an automatic trigger? Or is that something that should perhaps be evaluated for being repealed this session?
Mr. Schulte.
Chair Hurst, interested. I think it's something that needs to be evaluated. I don't know if repealing it entirely, but there needs to be a mechanism that the systems, I think, align with what they want to do as far as amortizing any new changes. So if you have an assumption change or a plan change, it may not make sense to lump it all together as the statutes are currently written and re-amortize it over 30 years, but to keep the current unfunded liability over its period and then maybe the new layers over their own period that it goes out 20 years or so.
Senator Rasmussen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Schulte, for that. And I think this is a really important conversation, and I also think it's important for this commission to really make sure that we're evaluating changes in amortization, because we had a pretty meaningful change in amortization show up in a conference committee report for a tax bill that was not approved by this commission. And I think that sets a very troubling precedent going forward, to not have these very technical matters reviewed by our actuaries and by this commission. And on the Senate floor, and I asked Senator Rest, the Senate chair of the tax committee, why that provision was in there. She said that she couldn't answer. And I think that that's just a bad way of doing public pension policy, and that we should continue these conversations and perhaps look at reevaluating that change that was made to the amortization date in the tax bill this last session. So thank you, Madam Chair, for the indulgence.
Thank you, Senator Rasmussen, for flagging that. I think it is important for us to look at that and maybe work more closely with our tax committee when these types of items come forward, so appreciate that. Any other questions from members? Representative Nadeau.
I just have two questions. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the first one, can you spend more time talking about the significance of this LD-ROM thing? It's come up. You have a whole slide on it. It's seemingly complicated. I'm trying to figure out the actual practical value of this. And my second question is probably simpler for you, and that's, should we start thinking about reducing the time frame from 30 to 25 to 20? Should we start actually thinking and having some work done on what does that look like, and what are the impacts of those on our plans?
Mr. Schulte.
Chair Hurst, Representative Nadeau. To your first question, you're right. This LD-ROM topic it's very complex, and it was developed initially by financial economists and actuaries to provide an alternative perspective on pension liabilities. What would happen if they were invested totally differently, essentially from a financial economics perspective, in low-risk securities? And when you do that, generally the discount rate's going to be lower, and it makes the liabilities look a lot higher because you're not getting the benefit of the returns from a balanced portfolio. I won't get into a lot of the technical details here because it's its own topic, but the issue with it is there's still a lot of latitude on how it's calculated. So actuaries calculate many different ways, and so they're really hard to compare. So for example, MSRS and PARA, how it's calculated in their report, it's more to illustrate, or one interpretation is, what is our anticipated savings almost of investing in a balanced portfolio versus an all bond portfolio. The way the TRA's actuary did it is they calculate it as if it's almost a planned termination liability, so cutting off all benefit accruals and then valuing it at these corporate bond rates. So they're not really comparable calculations. So I'd say it's not of a lot of use. So as far as day-to-day management of the pension plans, it's just an alternative perspective. It can create some headlines. That's really why I wanted to bring it up, in case there's an article somebody reads or there's some sort of headline news about this LD-ROM topic.
Representative Nadeau.
Answer that question.
Yes, and thank you. Because I do see it being used in ways that is going to make an already complex system more. There's more misinformation, and that's what I'm afraid of. And so yes, that answers my question, I guess. And the second one though.
Mr. Schulte, you can proceed.
Chair, Representative, for your second question, as far as the amortization period, yeah, I think it's very much worth a discussion among the interested parties, especially the systems and their retained actuaries too, of, what are their goals and objectives? Remember, this required contribution rate is really a yardstick. It's how we're measuring whether the fixed rates are sufficient or not. And some of them might be in a different funding position than others where it's just might not be feasible to use a 20-year period initially. I think in the TRA actuarial valuation report, they provide an alternative view where they say, let's take our current unfunded liability, amortize it over 25 years, and then in the future, they're going to provide just for informational purposes what it would look like to use layered amortizations of 20 years after that. So that information will be available essentially going forward in their report. But I think it's worth looking at it more, and that's kind of our last slide here is what's next? What are the next steps on this topic? And I think it's a discussion of should these required contribution rates, the yardstick, be updated? What are the options, and how do you balance some of the issues that go into it? We have sort of a spectrum of options. One is nothing, just leave statutes as they are, ranging all the way up to, let the retained actuaries and the systems do it, take it out of statute so that they kind of develop their own yardstick or measurement for the sufficiency. I'd say our preference would almost be either to just update the statutes or move it out of the statutes so it's in the LCPR actuarial standards. There's still oversight then by the commission, but it does allow us a little bit more flexibility, doesn't make it contingent on being a part of a larger piece of legislation. Other than that, I think that's the end of our prepared remarks. Glad to take any questions if members have questions.
Thank you, Mr. Schulte. And Director Lincheski has a comment.
Yeah, just a comment. Thank you, Chair Herr. I just wanted to note that the commission really should deal with this issue at some point. Right now, several of the plans have been required, I guess, by their actuary and this other statute to stretch out their amortization longer than another part of the statute actually provides. So we have this one section that says if certain things happen, you need to, evaluate your amortization period, and if your actuary says it should be longer, then you're required to make it longer. Another part of the statute says, for instance, para general, your amortization end date is going to be 2048. So, and I think that is one of the plans that's been told it needs to go to 2053 under the other part of the statute. So we now have, conflicting amortization dates, one required by one part of the statute, the other where there's an explicit year in it. So those two need to be reconciled in some way, and hopefully that's something that the commission will take on this session. We can talk about how to address that.
Thank you, Director Lincheski. And maybe this question, I don't know if it would be for Director Lincheski or to Mr. Schulte, but is this something that is of urgency that we would have to do right now, or is it something that we could we can work on in the interim to present for next year? Mr. Schulte?
Chair Herr, I think it's something that can be worked on over the interim. As I mentioned before, the money that's going into the plans, those fixed rates are set in statute. They're not changing. But really, I think improving the required contribution rates as comparison so that long-term the funding sufficiency and deficiency calculations, that there's more confidence in those. I think that's worth spending some time on in the interim to look at.
Thank you, Mr. Schulte. And Director Lincheski, so based on what you said about the conflicting direction now, is that something that the plans can hold off on doing right now, that pushing out the amortization, or?
So I don't think this can continue. It's a direct conflict. So we could amend the formulaic statute and say, notwithstanding the specific things down below in the next paragraph, this is how you're going to determine your amortization end date. We could do a little amendment that says that, notwithstanding the following. But right now, there's a direct conflict. And so I don't know how the plans are going to reconcile this. Their actuary is telling them one thing, the statute says another. For purposes of their next valuation, they need to know what the end date is. So.
Thank you, Director Lincheski. I see Senator Fritz.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Ms. Lincheski. Thanks for the testimony. I guess a possible approach here, Madam Chair, would be to hear from the plans today after all they're coming before us, ask them about their sense of urgency. Maybe we have underestimated a little bit, and if that's fine, we can talk, but if not, possibly work on it in the interim Just throwing that out there, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Frantz. I was thinking sort of the same thing. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Schulte. Is there anything else that you need to do with the presentation, or is that it for the presentation?
No, Chair Hurd, that's all we have today. Thank you for having us talk today, and realize some of these technical topics can be a bit overwhelming, but really want to bring them up because they are important to the long-term health of the pension plans, and always appreciate the opportunity to speak with the commission.
Thank you so much for the presentation today. Next, we will turn to a presentation from our public pension plans on the implementation of the 2023 pension legislation, as well as updates to their plan data. First, we will have a presentation from St. Paul Teachers Retirement Fund Association Executive Director and CIO, Phil Tensick. Welcome, Mr. Tensick. If you just want to identify yourself for the record and begin.
Thank you, Chair Herr, members of the commission. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me today to testify about St. Paul Teachers Retirement Fund Association. We are the oldest teachers retirement plan in the state, founded in 1909. Our governance, we're governed by a board of trustees, 9 elected members that come from the membership, and then 1 ex officio member appointed by the St. Paul Public Schools. So this is very much a plan governed by its members. We do have oversight by the legislature, this commission, and then the state auditor does audit the plan annually. Our actuary is Gabrielle Roeder-Smith, and since we do manage our investment portfolio, we also have a investment consultant, which is Asset Consulting Group. And then, of course, we're administered by myself and a very skilled and experienced staff. Stepping out to the membership level, we have more than 13,000 total members. That includes more than 3,000 active members, more than 4,000 retirees and survivors, 24 disabilitants, and 5,600 deferred members that will be eligible for benefit in the future. I think the most important line to look at on this slide is that active membership. In order for this to be a long-term, sustainable, viable plan, we need to make sure that we have a consistent active membership, and you will notice that that has held steady over the past 3 years. Our funding status as of the end of fiscal year, June 30, 2023, we were 65.3% funded. That accounts for $1.2 billion of plan assets versus an actuarial accrued liability of $1.9 billion, or a $700 million unfunded actuarial liability. Our plan contributions, we have 7.75% employee contributions. These are matched by 9% contribution from the employer, as well as 3.84% supplemental contributions from the employer, and then a state supplement of 5.12%. In total, the contributions to the plan are 25.7% of employee payroll versus an actuarial required contribution rate of 24.5%. So that results in a 1.2% ongoing contribution sufficiency. So we are on the positive side of the ledger there. When we factor in one-time state aid that was included in last legislative session, the sufficiency for the year would be 6.86%. I think it's important to look at plans not just on a contribution rate, but on an actual cash flow rate. We have to make benefit payments, so we need to understand the cash flows that are going on in our plan. So show that in the lower right portion of the slide. Note that when we net these out, total contributions are $94.4 million per year. So while we have a sufficiency, when you look at our actual benefit payments of $123 million, each year we need to generate $29.5 million of cash to meet our payments. And so that means we have to generate at least a 2.4% return to avoid dipping into the corpus of that $1.2 billion of assets. So each year there's a required cash flow necessary to meet our benefit payments. Providing a little longer term context for our funding ratios, would note that kind of the reason we're underfunded as a plan is, I would say, a persistent deficiency in contributions from kind of the 2003 to 2018 range, the infamous big red box in the lower left. That was due primarily to employer contributions being less than member contributions during that time period. In 2018, the 2018 omnibus bill did kind of flipped that equation, and now there's an ongoing sufficiency for the plan. So we did see our funding improve on a long-term basis from 2018 to last year, and then did see a decline. And on the next slide, I can show you kind of what caused that decline last year. So our unfunded liability at the beginning of the year was $547 million. We generated a $31 million investment return, so that would be in excess of those necessary cash flows I mentioned previously. Plan experience, the one-year experience, we saw a $14 million increase in the unfunded liabilities. The design changes that were in the legislation, so this was the value of the benefit increases, was $42.6 million. We don't show any increase in the funding last year since the one-time cash flows didn't arrive until this fiscal year, and employer contributions to fund these will not occur until 2025, July 1st of 2025. When you factor those in, this $42.6 million plan design increase will be fully offset, so there's no net impact to the unfunded liability on an ongoing basis. However, the biggest difference is the $84.2 million impact of changing the assumed rate of return for the plan. So when we move from 7.5% to a 7% discount rate, that increases the liability by $84 million, and there was no corresponding funding, which is why we did see that decrease in the funding ratio, increase in the unfunded liability. Kind of the impact of that change in the long term, we did see the glide path to fully funded extend from being fully funded in 2038 to fully funded in 2044. We'll note that that is still within our assumed amortization time period of 2048, so we do expect to be fully funded within the current unchanged amortization period of 2048. Also mentioned on the previous slide the investment impact. So since we do manage our investments outside of the state board, wanted to provide you an update on how those performed. Last year was a very good year for us in the markets. We were 9.4% return, best pension return in the state, we would note. Additionally, we were top quartile amongst all pension plans. But 1 year is not probably the right perspective, so I'd focus you on the 10-year as well, where we had a 7.8% long-term rate of return above that 7.5% discount rate that had been in effect. And that was also above our target index of 7.45%. So our investments have performed quite well on a long-term basis, exceeding both our assumed rate of returns and our policy index. One impact of the change in the discount rate that is going to be unique to us as well is we were able to complete an asset allocation study. And so the Commission's actuary suggested that the state complete this in the oncoming years. We actually did complete this last year and did make some changes. So with a lower discount rate, we actually de-risked our plan's investments. So in the lower left corner, you can see that we reduced our equity and opportunistic risks. So these are kind of return-seeking, a little more risky assets, and moved those to fixed income. So we had a 10 percentage point increase in our fixed income. So when we look at that on a risk basis, how much risk is in the plan for participants, we saw the standard deviation, which is kind of the highest level measure of risk, go from 13.5% down to 11%. So kind of the amount of volatility we'd expect to see in 1 year. And then when we stress tested the portfolio versus a standard 60-40 portfolio, we saw the decrease in risk go from a kind of a 20% decrease versus standard portfolio to a 25% decrease. So we have drawn down the risk in the portfolio. So we expect next economic downturn, we will have less investment loss. So that makes it more secure for our members going forward, keeps us on track to meet our full amortization within that 2048 amortization period. Looking at plan design, kind of one other area of note is our annual increase. So we're currently at a 1% annual increase for retirees. This is as low as any other plan in the state, and would note that it's also lower than TRAs, which is on a path to a 1.5% funding. So we do see a disparity between same-to-all teachers and teachers throughout the state. Additionally, this has been an ongoing difference between our plan and other plans in the state. Over the past 20 years, our retirees have taken a 1% or even in some years a 0% annual increase. And as a result, we've seen their pensions fall by 26 or 25.7% versus a baseline of when they retired in 2003. Which kind of leads us into what our legislative, I'd say, principles are. being fiduciaries, we don't have prescriptive, targeted policies, but we do believe in objectives. I think the first one is maintaining the benefit security for our current members. At our 65% funded ratio, we need to make sure that we continue on the path to full funding to meet the promises that have already been made to our membership. If we move forward and are able to find the ability to fund benefit increases, I think the first area we'd want to look at is achieving parity with the other Minnesota state pension plans. And kind of the two areas where we see a disparity is that annual increase and then the funding shortfall being the lowest funded of the state plans. Finally, if the strong economy keeps going, we see a significant surplus and a large target, we would look to add benefit increases beyond parity, targeting again that inflation relief for retired members, and then subsequent to that, benefit improvements for our current members. With that, I conclude my remarks and open the floor to any questions.
Thank you. Members, do you have any questions?
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tenchik, and appreciate the hard work that you've put into this. I know you and I have had conversations outside of this about, how you've performed in your investments, and I think as you mentioned, you're the only plan that manages your own investments. Is that correct?
Chair, that's correct.
That's right. So thank you so much for that, and you all have done a really good job. So we appreciate the presentation today.
Thank you.
Next, we will have a presentation from the Minnesota State Retirement Systems Executive Director, Aaron Leonard.
Good morning, members. Aaron Leonard, the Executive Director of the Minnesota State Retirement System. Happy first day of session. Getting right into pensions right away here. So happy to be here to present the annual funding update for MSRS plans. First, want to go through just a reminder of our governance. We do have an 11-member board of directors, a combination of elected and appointed members. Most plans are represented on our board, so we have a state patrol plan specific member, a correctional plan specific member, one retiree, and then 4 general or unclassified plan members. Our boards oversee the policy and administration of 9 plans for Minnesota. 5 of those are defined benefit traditional pension plans, and then we do have 4 defined contribution plans that are available to various public employees. This year was a great year as far as an investment return. The SBI achieved an 8.9%. So any sort of numbers in this document will be reflecting that 8.9% return. Pensions, as you are all aware, is a long-term business. It's really important for us to look back on the past, look at our current numbers and see how we're doing. And then those current numbers predict how we might be funded in the future. And so I like this snapshot going back to 2007. It's before the Great Recession, and during this time, there were a lot of challenges in Minnesota and just broadly throughout the economy. At that point, in 2007, we were assuming an 8.5% return or discount rate for our plans. We've dropped that down to 7% in this period. And then also, we had the Great Recession and a few other big economic changes. In 2015, we reflected longer life expectancies, which also increased liabilities. And despite all of those challenges, our largest plan is still at 95%. So I think the prudent work of this commission, of our board of directors, and all of us involved in pensions have really resulted in that positive outcome. I'm going to take a slightly different approach when talking about our funding this year. We are celebrating 95 years of service. So MSRS was established as the Retirement System Association for State Employees in 1929. And this year we'll hit our 95th birthday, for lack of a better description. The plan as we know it, or the system as we know it, was shifted in 1967 and has been operating this way since. And with that in mind, I thought I would tell you a story. We tell a lot of stories and share a lot of positive comments from our participants among MSRS staff. And I thought I'd tell you a story of one of our retirees who passed away last year. She was 106 and 6 months old. So she was 3 days shy of being 6 months old, but I'm gonna give her credit because that's a really long time to live. And just to give you some context, she was born in 1916, so she was 13 years old when MSRS was established. She retired in 1978 at the age of 62, worked at Mankato State University for over 35 years, and was retired for over 45 years. So when we're looking at pension plans and the importance of the funding of them, we're looking at individuals who live longer than we would have ever expected. The value of a defined benefit pension plan is that pooled risk, pooled longevity risk, pooled investment risk. And she's the perfect example of the value associated with that, and that she was able to live beyond 100 years old. At the time of her birth, she would have had a 2% chance of living to be 100. So she clearly exceeded expectations. So with that in mind, talk a little bit about our funding. As I mentioned, the MSRS general plan is almost 95% funded. We didn't plan it that way, but 95 years of service, 95% funded is a pretty good place to be. We do have 3 contribution sufficiency numbers listed here, and they are specifically related to that discussion you just had with the actuaries from the LCPR. So in our funding valuation, you'll see that our contribution sufficiency is 1.3%. That is assuming a 2053 amortization date. The MSRS general plan was one of those plans that was impacted by that statute where they had to look at either 2048 or extending amortization because of those additional liabilities. If we hadn't extended to 2053 and would have kept a 2048 amortization date, we would still have a funding sufficiency, but it would be 1.17%. So still a good sufficiency. And then this also does take into account that current active employees are paying 5.5% of pay. You may recall last year during session, we reduced that ongoing employee contribution by 0.5% of pay for 2 years, supplemented by funding from the state in the pension bill. So if we go back up to the 6% for active employees, we still have a 1.67% sufficiency. So really a good path for the general plan. And right now, our projected full funding date is 2032. So well before that 2048 date or 2053 date, we're scheduled to be on track to be fully funded in 2032. Our correctional plan, not as well funded, about 75%. But this year, the good news with this plan is we do have a contribution sufficiency. So last year, we had a slight deficiency, meaning we weren't collecting enough contributions to pay current and future benefits. This year, we were able to have a funding sufficiency of 0.5% of pay. This plan is also on track to be fully funded by 2047 before that 2048 amortization date. Our state patrol plan is over 80% funded. This plan has a really a really sizable sufficiency of over 7% of pay, 7.85%. That sounds like a lot of money, but this plan is it's a small plan. It's more volatile as as we see markets go up and down, the sufficiency can go away very quickly. This also doesn't reflect any sort of increased disability rates that we have experienced the last handful of years. So when we did some analysis earlier in 2023, our actuary determined that if we see that increased disability rate, that sufficiency would be basically depleted by a large amount. We do have an experience study going for this plan currently, so we expect this summer to know if we'll be making any changes related to disability rates. The plan is currently on track to be fully funded in 2037. So again, ahead of schedule because of that sizable sufficiency. And then the last plan that I'll just go through the snapshot is our judges plan. Currently 62.5% funded. It doesn't sound good when you say they're 62% funded, but they've made a lot of progress over the last handful of years by reducing benefits. And this plan is an example of when you don't pre-fund a pension plan appropriately. It started pre-funding in 1992 when most of our other plans started pre-funding in the 1970s. It just takes longer to catch up and get to that fully funded mark. Despite that, they have a contribution sufficiency of 2.63% of pay and are on track to be fully funded by 2047. So all good news from MSRS pension plans, just in this quick snapshot. The next few pages have more details. I'm not gonna go through them all, but, sorry. So just a quick thing, modest benefits. So when Marguerite originally started her benefit, the participant I told you about earlier, she was receiving $411 a month, which would be about $1,900 a month in 2023 dollars. So despite our long service with 95 years as a plan, we still offer pretty modest benefits in today's dollars or in the past dollars. And our post-retirement increase is 1.5% fixed. So all of our plans are at a 1.5% fixed post-retirement increase, except for our state patrol plan, which is currently at a 1%. They've been at 1% since 2010. There's the liabilities on the state patrol plan. Over 2/3 of the liabilities are on the retiree side. So to increase the post-retirement increase is quite a large cost. But it is something that I just point out, it is a difference between the plans. All right. And then just to touch on a couple of our additional plans besides our pension plan, the legislators plan is closed since 1997. We currently only have 7 active legislators that are in that plan, and 19 individuals that have not yet collected, so they're deferred retirees. And then we have our unclassified plan, which includes a lot of legislative staffers, as well as commissioners' appointees, just over 3,500 participants. And then I'll call your attention to our last 2 plans. Our Minnesota Deferred Compensation Plan is among the 5th largest in the country of this type. This year was the milestone. We hit over 100,000 participants in this plan. We've been really proactively reaching out to new employees, new active state employees, to get them enrolled, because this is part of the pension plan solution to get additional savings. And then our healthcare savings plan was established in 2001, our newest plan, but also fastest growing, and we have over 160,000 participants. So for the 2024 legislative agenda, we don't have a lot on the agenda. We do have a small administrative bill that hopefully we will be hearing in the coming weeks. We do ask for the adoption of the experience study results that our actuary prepared, specifically some changes to early retirement factors because of life expectancy. I will note that this will change. These experience study changes will also change our early retirement reduction factors and the unclassified factors used to calculate benefits. Our board is proposing to implement those factor changes over 36 months. The goal is, if you spread it out over a longer period of time, we won't see big shifts in retirement rates. So it reflects a small percentage each month, under $10 per month. We don't have any proposed benefit changes or assumption changes from our assumed rate of return at this time. And then there may be some stakeholder bills regarding specifically around eligibility that may come forward, and we can opine on those as they come about. So that is really the update for MSRS. If you have any questions, happy to answer them.
Thank you, Director Leonard. Members, any questions? It looks like there are no questions for you at this time, Director Leonard. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Up next, we do have a presentation from the Public Employee Retirement Association Executive Director, Doug Anderson.
Morning, Madam Chair, Commission members. Apologize for the slight delays. I'm closing in on it.
Members, we're going to continue, Mr. Anderson, with your testimony. And when the chair returns, we'll switch seats. And there's the chair now. I swear I wasn't taking over.
I didn't know the protocol for leaving the table. Thank you.
Apologize for my technical delay. Good morning, Madam Chair, Commission members. I'm Doug Anderson, Executive Director of the Public Employees Retirement Association. PARA has been around since 1931. I think that makes us the youngest of the funds, but we have grown to be the largest. We do have an 11-member board of directors. 5 of these members are appointed by the governor, 5 are elected, 1 is the state auditor. Our elected positions are elected by all the active and retired members of the General, Correctional, and Police and Fire Fund, even though some of the positions are dedicated for, say, a police and fire member. So all members vote for elected trustees, but then all trustees vote on all issues related to the plan, not just the plan that they may be a member of. Their responsibilities are similar to what Ms. Leonard described for MSRS. Mostly it's setting policies. It's providing positions on issues that come before you. They do also hear appeals, but I want to note that these are really pretty rare. It's been more than 2 years since we've had an appeal come to the board, despite processing over 20,000 new annuitants and refunds each year. So it's pretty rare when we have an issue come back to the board. I'm going to talk just first about the non-cost sharing plans. And by non-cost sharing, we're talking about whether or not employers share gains or losses in the plan. So non-cost sharing means that for our defined contribution plan, for instance, this covers elected officials of cities and townships. These are direct contributions from that city or township for their member. There's no gains or losses. Similarly, for the statewide volunteer fire department, there's 235 different fire departments, each with their own plan. The governing body of each plan is the one responsible for the funding. The costs are not shared with the other 235 plans. Up in Fergus Falls, I spoke about the statewide volunteer firefighter plan. We're pretty excited about the incentive program that the legislature created to incent more plans to join. We've had a lot of interest, and we're guessing we may see that plan grow maybe by 100 different departments, which might add about 2,000 to 3,000 more members this coming year. The cost-sharing plans, the general plan, police and fire plan, correctional plan, I'm just going to point out a few different things here, one comment on each plan. I want to note for the general plan, there's 158,000 deferred members. These are no longer active, not receiving. It includes 90,000 non-vested terminated members with an average account balance of less than $500. I'm pointing that out because that's a group that it's generally our school employee, female members, school employees who come in for a few years, do not vest, leave, and have a small account balance. It's not unlike them being in a bad defined contribution plan within our defined benefit plan. All they get is their employee contributions plus 3% interest. That's what we get. So we've seen that as an opportunity to look at that. Is there something better we can do with that? It's not a this year initiative, but it's something we've identified as wanting to explore. Is there a better approach for that group? Police and fire plan, I'd point to the large number of disability retirements. So these are disability recipients who have reached retirement age. You know, last year there was a law change related to the disability process. We're 7 months past that law change. We have seen the number of disability applications go from about 19 a month down to less than 10 a month. And that's applications for either disability benefit or entering treatment. Too early to draw any conclusions, but that's a so far positive development. In the correctional plan, I would just point to the high number of deferred members. There's just high turnover in this plan. It's not necessarily a comment about what's happening with the plan, just there's high turnover in that group. What's on this page talks about the health, the financial health of the general plan. I'll weigh in here on the amortization discussion. I am an actuary. I've mentioned that over my 8 years on this job. Prior to working here, I worked as a consulting actuary both on private plans and public plans. Private plans are very prescriptive on funding. You must fund. It's a 7-year amortization. It's done on a conservative measurement. It was very prescriptive and very boring for me to do. There's no judgment at all. There's a lot of judgment in the public sector side. And that was a part of the job that I enjoyed more, but it also meant coming into, because of that judgment, coming into situations, seeing where things didn't go well, trying to figure out why they didn't go well, how to improve them from there. That's part of why I'm in this job. So I do have an opinion about this, the amortization period. I agree with Mr. Schulte. It's a weak standard. What we currently have right now is a weak standard. 30 years is too long. Anything more than 18 or 19 years, if you're contributing that payment, is not even covering the interest on the unfunded liability. So in this case, our $5.6 billion unfunded liability, if the contributions only cover the recommended contribution, it won't even cover the interest, that amount will grow. I absolutely think that that recalculation to extend to 30 years should change. And then I also just asked the question a little bit more in a different way is the reason to get to 100% funded is a lot about intergenerational equity. Are you transferring the cost from one generation to the other? Are you taking a past service liability and having your future members pay for it? And when I think of the question is it appropriate to shift the cost from one generation to another over 30 years? I don't think so. We shouldn't have that at all. We should strive to be 100% funded. So on this page, I think the only two real important things to know is where we're at now, 83% funded, and a projected full funding date of 2041. Yes, we have a 1.3% funding sufficiency, but that just means we're ahead of the pace, we're ahead of a weak standard, really. And I also just get concerned that someone would view that and say, well, couldn't we use that 1.3% elsewhere? And I don't think that's appropriate for this plan. We've got to focus on improving the funding. Police and fire plan, 86% funded. This does have a funding deficiency. It's not meeting that weak standard. Also of concern, and Ms. Leonard mentioned this with the highway patrol plan, is we're using some outdated assumptions still on the disability rates. We're hopeful that the disability rates will come down from where they were, but still the assumption, they're still likely higher than what we're currently assuming. There is an experience study underway. Those results will be important, but a little concern about the basis for these numbers here, that they might be a little optimistic. So this has a long period to full funding. It's not in a particularly good situation for its funding status. And then for our correctional plan, this plan is in relatively good shape, 96% funded. But this is a curious thing, I think, for actuaries, Mr. Schulte maybe, and me. It's a funding deficiency, which would indicate it's not on track to be fully funded in 30 years. But our actuary says our projected full funding date is 2045, which is before 30 years. The reason for this is that the normal cost calculation, the normal cost will be drifting down for this plan over time as the demographics for this group changes over time. So the numbers are accurate, but also I would kind of point that funding deficiency, kind of proceed with caution when thinking about that number and focus on the projected full funding date. Since 2007, really haven't made much progress. There's not a very strong commitment the funding. There's no must about meeting the target date. The amortization target date is more or less a suggestion. There's no penalty for not making it. It keeps getting stretched out, and we haven't been making much progress. I should have noted that there's the statutory change to extend the amortization date. It affected the police and fire plan to move out the amortization from 2048 to 2049. And it changed it for the correctional plan from 2048 to 2053. I also should have, is it urgent to change the amortization approach? I'd say no. Since it's a suggested target, whether it's 20 years or 40 years or whatever it is, a suggestion, it's not changing the contribution rates, it's not changing the benefits, it's not changing our projected full funding date. It just changes how we look at that target. So yes, it should change. Is it urgent that it be done this session? I don't think so, but I think it should be looked at more closely. This slide covers what was presented on the other slides. This is how we present this to stakeholders. And I have these two slides on how we talk with our stakeholders. So this is just focusing them on the metrics they need to know, which is primarily where are we currently funded and what's the rate of improvement, when will it become fully funded, when will we quit shifting costs from one generation to the next. All of this leads up to, how do you assess the health of these funds, not just the metrics of the funding status, but also what it means to different groups. We have been kind of developed this scorecard for how we talk with our board, how we talk with our stakeholders on how we're doing on certain metrics and what are priorities of these funds. And we do this because we want to provide you with good information for your decisions, and we want our board to be respected when they take positions. And we want to help our stakeholders, bring good ideas to you. So these are 4 areas that we measure. First, are the assumptions appropriate? And we think we're doing fairly well here, but we just note the concern about outdated police and fire rates that we hope will be addressed more carefully here with the next experience study. Is the plan expected to achieve and maintain fully funded status? Well, some plans are doing better than others. Correctional plan's in good shape. Police and fire plan taking almost 40 years to become fully funded, that's not very good. Do employees and employers contribute the appropriate amount? So this is how do the contributions by the employee and the employer compare to the normal cost? General plan, the contributions are 164% of the normal cost. That means the current generation is paying 64% more than what they should for their benefits. They're doing that to pay off this large unfunded liability, and they'll have to do that for a long period of time. Police and fire plan also paying 27% more than what they should, which isn't as bad as the general plan, relatively, but they'll have to do that for 40 years to pay off those costs. Correctional plan has managed to avoid all this. They've only been around 20 years, kind of avoided what got these other plans in some trouble, and that's sitting where it should. The contributions are very close to the normal cost. So they're in good shape. All it would take to fix the funding status and get the contributions back in line with the normal cost is $7.5 billion. If you put that in now, that would fix row 2, fix row 3, be good. Absent that, it's going to take a lot of time for these extra contributions to do their work, and we would hope that the investment returns can beat the assumption. That would help as well. And then last but certainly not least is, do the retirees have sufficient inflation protection? At PARA, we do want to tie the retiree increases to inflation. We all know and talked about that's very expensive to do. They're not quite keeping pace. The correctional plan is a better model because it provides 100% inflation up to 2.5% cap. because that plan is in a good position to do that. We can afford it. So we want to see the other plans kind of move that direction towards where the correctional plan is. The only thing that's currently stopping the general plan, the police and fire plan to get to where the correctional plan is $3.7 billion. So 7.5 billion to fix row 2 and 3, 3.7 to fix row 4 would get us, I think, to where we want to be on all the plans. But these are, a lot about this is just setting priorities. So an example and why we talk to stakeholders about this is that if a stakeholder group comes to us and say, we want higher COLAs, higher post-retirement increases in the police and fire plan, period, and that's all they say, we would say that would not gain board support because it would either hurt the funding status or require costs from the employees and the employers to do that. If the stakeholders come and say, we want that inflation protection and we want the legislature to fully fund it, that may gain board support because it's not harming the funding status or putting contributions on the next generation. So again, this is how we try to guide stakeholders and try to get them to, get initiatives to be focused on the highest priorities. And then closing with Amy Strange, our policy coordinator and I are trying harder to distinguish between para initiatives and stakeholder initiatives. These are just the para initiatives. All are at no cost or insignificant cost or maybe even some savings. So these are initiatives that we'll bring forward this year. Working on the executive director qualifications and the statutes and the salary range. We just want to be on the same page with TRA and MSRS. For general correctional plan, we want to have workers' compensation offsets similar to what the police and fire plan. Defined contribution plan, we want to make sure it's consistent with IRS regulations. The statewide volunteer fire plan, we think there's an approach to save administrative costs. And then lastly, an effort we've had for a while to make sure that any healthcare facility that privatizes pays their fair share of the unfunded liability. Those are the para initiatives for this year, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Members, questions for Mr. Anderson or para? All right, seeing none. Sorry, Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, our friend, Mr. Rice, likes to talk about how for years we've kind of funded pensions on the cheap. And I'm looking at this and I mean, it's good to see that we only need 10 billion to fix this. I mean, that seems like but where is the para board on providing those, maybe direction? Are they gonna come forward with some modifications, some proposals that will, when I look at, I look at 64% of someone's contributions going to decisions that were or weren't made years ago, and they're gonna pay for this over such a long period of time. I mean, it seems silly to even talk about a 20-year amortization when you're looking at this, because the numbers would be massive. I mean, it would be 20 billion. I don't know, it'd be a lot more. So are there gonna be some proposals that the para board would come forward with other than, what the initiatives here are, that could slowly try to change that trajectory rather than waiting every seemingly 5 or 6 years where we come up with a big bill that makes a few modifications and it takes 3 years to figure out what we actually did? Is that a better approach than what we've done in the past, or am I just out of line? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Anderson, better approach.
Mr. Chair, Representative Nadeau, it's a good question. Para's board has to balance a lot of interests, which include the members, the employers, the taxpayers as well. So they have to balance that. And, I think the primary initiative of the para board is to make sure that any stakeholder initiatives are consistent with para priorities. So stakeholders will have initiatives come forward. PAIR's board will take positions. We'd want to make sure that they're considering all the interests of all of our different stakeholder groups and making sure that they're reasonable going forward.
Representative Neto, any follow-up?
Just quickly, and I mean, it just seems like that approach has gotten us where this is. I mean, it just seems like we need to take a little bit stronger look at what it is that we're doing, to try to make those improvements, rather than just, kind of waiting until it gets so bad that, we ultimately have to do something. And maybe that's our job, Mr. Chair. Maybe that's our job to sit here and try to work through those things. But this one doesn't leave me very, very happy, actually. But thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Neto. Members, any other questions? Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Anderson. Representative Dole said $10 billion, but on my math, you said it's $9.5 billion to fix the general and police and fire to get them up to funding, and another 3.7 to get the COLAs to match. So my math, that's $13.2 billion that we're gonna need to correct these, bring these today up to date. Is that what you're saying?
Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Chair, Representative Nelson, I'm not sure what I may have said. My notes right here say 7.5 billion would fix the unfunded, and 3.7 billion would get the general plan and police and fire plan up to the same post-term increases as the correctional plan, a total of 11.2 billion to get to that point.
Thank you, Mr. I heard 9.5, but that's okay.
Okay, I may have misspoken.
Thank you, Representative Nelson. Members, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Anderson. Members, we're looking at maybe going a few minutes over here. We're going to now hear from a presentation from Teachers Retirement Association leadership, Executive Director Jay Stoffel, and Legislative Liaison Holly Dayton. Mr. Stoffel, Ms. Dayton, welcome back to LCPR.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members. My name is Jay Stoffel. I'm the Executive Director of the Teachers Retirement Association, and with me today is Holly Dayton. She's our Legislative Liaison person. I'll start off, and in the interest of time, I'll kind of go through some of the preliminary slides rather quickly. Slide number 2, page 2, is similar to what you've seen from the other funds. Our board is a little bit different structure. 4 elected active teachers, one elected retiree, and then 3 statutory members. The duties and the powers and so forth are pretty similar to what you've heard already from the other funds. Next page, 3 is our membership structure. Over 214,000 members. You can see how the numbers break out there. It's been a pretty stable history of membership counts over the last several years. I'm going to focus, this is one, on this page, this is one of the important pages I want to focus on. It shows our unfunded our actuarial status or financial status at June 30, 22 compared to June 30 of 23. We currently have a $35 billion actuarial accrued liability and assets of 26.7, an $8.3 billion unfunded liability. You can see how the liabilities grew over the past year. The assets grew by $1 billion. And what's important to know too, our assets grew by $1 billion, but we also spent $2 billion during the year in benefit payments. So that's part of our cash flow exercise. We're spending money all the time, regardless of what the markets are doing. We're spending about $2 billion every year on benefits. So our funded ratio last year was 81.0 compared to currently 76.4. And that's on a market value basis. So I'll talk a little bit more about how we got there on an upcoming slide. Actually, the next page. We'll talk about where we were June 30 of 22 and how we got to where we are June 30 of 23. We started the year with a $5.7 billion unfunded liability. Normal cost is the cost to provide benefits for the upcoming year, $565 million. We had employee and employer contributions of almost $1 billion, interest on the unfunded liability of $411 million. So those are the things that are normally happening every year. The rest of these items on this list are what we call experience gains or losses, how the fund, what actually happened in regards to all these different activities compared to our assumptions. So in terms of salary increases, we had an actuarial gain, and that happens when salaries are lower than expected because benefits in part are based on salaries. So as salaries grow at a lower rate, benefits grow at a lower rate. So we have an actuarial gain when salary increases are lower. That was $171 million. We had another actuarial gain for investment return. In fiscal year 23, we earned 8.9% compared to our assumption of 7%. So that's a very significant actuarial gain. That's very good news. And then next on the list is another actuarial gain for mortality. We had a slightly higher experience with mortality, meaning a small number of people were dying faster than what we assumed or earlier than what we assumed. So that's an actuarial gain of $42 million. And these are relatively small numbers, by the way. Another actuarial loss for the retirement experience, that's just a measure of when people are retiring, at which age, earlier or lower than what's assumed. So we had, and then there were some other things combined in that number of $81 million. And then normal retirement age, this is a benefit improvement that was passed last year. That's as we look forward into the liability structure of our plan, that added $615 million to the liability side of the equation. And then one of the largest numbers on the page here, or it is the largest number, $2 billion is an additional liability for reducing the return assumption from 7.5 to 7. When we add up all those changes, we started the year with a $5.7 billion unfunded liability, and that grew to $8.1 billion at the end of the fiscal year due to all those changes. The next page is a history of our funded ratio using market value of assets. You can see over time how back in the late 90s, we were actually very well funded, overfunded. There's been a lot of dips and increases in our funded ratio. Some of that is investment market activity, where we have earned a lot of extra money and lost a lot of money along the way. Some of the dips that you see in this chart relate to reductions in the earnings assumption. We had an earnings assumption of 8.5% for a long time. That was reduced to 7.5% and then to 7% ultimately where we are today. So that has a significant impact on the unfunded liabilities. The next page is kind of a picture of the sufficiency of our contributions. You've seen this information from the other funds already. We have current employee contributions of 7.75%, employer contribution of 8.91%. And that number is, the employer contribution is comprised of the employer rate of 8.75 for the majority of the employers around the state. We have a basic member, literally one member left in our basic plan. That's a person not covered by Social Security. That person is well into their 70s and still teaching. So that employer rate is 16.39%. And then the Minneapolis schools contribute a higher employer contribution rate due to the merger of the Minneapolis Teacher Retirement Fund. Their contribution rate is 12.39. So that's a blended rate. The 8.91% is a blend of all those things to come up with that rate. We get direct state aid payments of 0.58%. So in statute, we have 17.24% coming into the fund. The actuaries calculate what needs to come into the fund to keep the fund whole. 11.39% is the rate for the normal cost. 8.38% is the rate to amortize the unfunded liability. So we've got 19.77% is the rate recommended by the actuaries, which leaves us with a deficiency of 2.53%. So officially, that's where the fund stands at the end of the fiscal year using the statutes and the actuarial standards that we operate under in the state of Minnesota. But it's really not the end of the story. If you turn the page, the 2.53% is reduced, actually turns into a sufficiency if all the things that are on this page that we expect to happen actually do occur. And I'm confident that they will occur. There's nothing that leads me to believe that they won't occur. But we start, again, with a 2.53% deficiency. We have an employer contribution rate that's scheduled to go up to 9.5% on July 1 of '25. The employee contribution rate is scheduled to go up by 0.25% to 8%. We have in the last pension bill, we had state funding of $145 million, and that actually occurred. These are all things that we're expecting to occur after June 30 of 2023. So the state funding of $145 million actually was received in October, so that item on the list has actually occurred. Amortization date extended from 2048 to 2053. We expect that to happen. That was in the pension bill. And then demographic assumption changes from our experience study. If you take all those things into account, we have what I would call a small surplus or sufficiency of 0.55% of pay. The next page shows you the path that we're on. If all the actuarial assumptions are met, and if, excuse me, if those items that will actually occur that I just covered on the previous page, we will be fully funded by the year 2049. And with that, I'll turn it over to Holly to talk about our legislative agenda coming up.
Thank you, Mr. Stoffel. Ms. Dayton, fire away.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. Happy first day of session to you. Yes, so I'm going to switch gears and just briefly talk about TRA's 2024 legislative agenda. The first item is that back in 2022, the legislature suspended the statutory earnings limitation for TRA members, retired TRA members who returned to covered TRA service. We refer to these folks as reemployed annuitants. And this was suspended for fiscal years 22, 23, and 24, and so we're coming to the end of that suspension. This was intended to help address Minnesota's teacher shortage. And at their January board meeting, our Board of Trustees directed staff to seek a legislative extension of this suspension for an additional 3 years. So that would be fiscal years 2025, 2026, and 2027. We know that Minnesota's teacher shortage is continuing to endure, and we have heard from some of our districts that extending the earnings limitation suspension would be helpful to them with their hiring practices. We intend to bring a bill forward to you and discuss this at a later hearing. So that's some work that we'll be working on. Additionally, I don't have a slide on this, but we will be looking for the LCPR to adopt our demographic experience study recommendations. And I think we've transmitted those to the board formally, but we'll be, I'm sure, discussing that as a later date as well. So back in 2015, the TRA Board of Trustees adopted a set of guiding principles in accordance with their fiduciary duties. And the purpose of this was to provide guidance to the TRA board and us as staff when making decisions and when communicating with our members, our stakeholder groups, and with you all as the decision makers over a lot of aspects of our pension plan. There are 4 principles, and I want to run through these with you just briefly this morning. First is that TRA's members, benefit recipients, employers, and the state of Minnesota should all share in funding our pension plan. When sustainability measures were taken in the past, such as in 2018, this principle was used in shaping the ultimate shared sacrifice approach to that sustainability package that I'm sure you're all familiar with. The second principle is that changes to the pension plan's benefits and the funding should avoid exacerbating existing imbalances between generations or creating new ones. Third, TRA's financial sustainability should be ensured, and our fund should move towards full funding within a reasonable amortization period. As the people with a fiduciary duty over this pension fund, our board members must place the financial sustainability of the TRA pension fund at the center of what they do. So that's the lens through which they tend to look at things, and they should look at things. Finally, we acknowledge the challenges that the teacher shortages cause, and our board believes that benefit changes should be considered with respect to how they may impact the recruitment value of pensions. So over the past year or so, the TRA board has heard from many of our stakeholders advocating for benefit improvements. In particular, we have heard directly from members and read thousands of emails expressing frustration and even more over the current two-tiered system in Minnesota. Our members are engaged, and we know that you've also heard from them. So during recent meetings, the board has considered various benefit proposals and the estimated costs of implementing those. These costs were prepared by our consulting actuary, and they help guide the conversation around cost and risk. And specifically with the pension, that's whether or not with an $8 billion unfunded liability, can the pension fund take on additional risk into the future? And so trying to balance everything appropriately. So the board has also considered as part of their conversations possible headwinds that significant reform may face during this legislative session. And given expected budgetary limitations, the board directed us as staff to use the guiding principles that I just walked you through to determine the best course of action with regards to legislation. This direction gives us the opportunity to thoroughly engage with our stakeholders and with you as lawmakers as ideas come to the surface, and we are eager to do so in a collaborative manner. So that concludes our comments, and we are happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dayton. Thanks again, Mr. Stoffel. Members, your packet will reflect that there are no less than 44 letters of submission, which we're not going to read into the record. But just anecdotally, we had a meeting with teachers in my district on Saturday, about 60 of them. I've taken a little look, and these letters mirror the kinds of concerns we were hearing at that time. With that, and with the letters being recognized not individually but as a group, members, are there any questions for our friends from TRA? Mr. Stoffel, Ms. Dayton? Representative Nadeau.
Just one quick one. And it has to do with this guiding principle. I mean, it's obviously gotten important for you guys to bring it to us, I think. And I'm gonna look at just number one, the shared commitment thing. Does this mean that the TRA board would be neutral or not supportive if all of a sudden we found, $1 billion? If it wasn't shared, if there wasn't a shared commitment between teachers and that $1 billion, that the TRA board would be unwilling to support a proposal like that? And vice versa, if there were a proposal that came forward that basically said, teachers want to buy a benefit and they want to pay for it themselves. Does it also mean that the TRA board would be not supportive of any proposals like that?
Thank you, Representative. Perhaps that's best for Mr. Stoffel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Nadeau. Well, first, I guess, when it comes to how contributions are structured in the state of Minnesota, there is an LCPR policy document, standards that lays out how contributions should be structured. And in that document, if I can recall it correctly, there's normal cost, the cost of the benefits that should be shared. I don't think it says shared equally, but shared by the employee and the employer. And then the document also says that the employees should also contribute towards the unfunded liability. So those are the broad parameters, and employees are certainly putting in a high contribution rate relative to normal cost. So they're paying down, a lot of their contribution is going towards paying down past unfunded, past liability and current unfunded liability. So an idea, if the state were to contribute another $1 billion, if that's the scenario where there's $1 billion that would come into the fund, I think that would be something that we would graciously accept. There's already a sharing going on. There's no reason why that wouldn't be accepted, if I understand that scenario correctly. But otherwise, I think we look towards what do the Pension Commission standards reflect, and what seems fair or appropriate as far as contribution structure.
Thank you, Mr. Stoffel. Representative Neto, any follow-up? Members, probably worth just throwing out there for the umpteenth time that Chair Herr negotiated a $600 million target last session, the largest in the state's history. So as we talk about some of the possibilities here, a little context will probably help us. Any further member questions for TRA? Members, thank you very much, Ms. Dayton, Mr. Stoffel, for your presentation. Members, that concludes our business today. Next commission hearing will be on Monday, February 19th. The plan for Chair Her is to hear the resulting legislation from IRAP to TA work group and consider other legislating items. Seeing no further business, on behalf of Chair Her in front of this committee, we are adjourned.